Good to be with you. I'm Katie Tur. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth did spend 3 hours on Capitol Hill today, day 2 of testimony, this time in front of a much tougher panel of lawmakers in the Senate Armed Services Committee. This hearing comes at a pivotal moment, day 59 of this war, which means tomorrow, day 60, is the deadline under the War Powers Resolution for the president to go to Congress to get authorization. Will that happen? Hegseth deflected, arguing the ceasefire pauses that clock. Does it really? We're going to ask congressional wonk Jake Sherman in a moment when he joins us. There's also a big open question on whether this Congress will say yes to the president if he does come to Congress. There are some highly skeptical Republicans who could join Democrats and say no. They do include senators who are not so pleased with Hegseth's leadership, his decision-making, people like Tom Tillis and Lisa Murkowski. Both Hegseth and Joint Chiefs General Dan Kane in the hearing itself faced tough questions today about why we went to war in the first place, especially without public support, whether we're actually winning the war, how much less prepared we may now be for the next war, and how much money we're actually spending. Is it really the $25 billion the administration claims, or is it likely a whole lot more, $50 billion? How much higher will it go? And for next year, will the $1.4 trillion budget request be spent effectively? Is that much money really needed? There were also questions about whether Hegseth was willing to commit war crimes. We're going to have an exchange between Senator Mark Kelly and Pete Hegseth regarding that in a moment. First, though, here is Senator Mark Kelly pressing Hegseth on the Strait of Hormuz.
This war is stuck. The Strait of Hormuz is closed. The Iranian regime is in place. The nuclear material still in their hands. Americans are being crushed by higher costs, and it's not clear to them at all what the goal of this war is.
Joining us, MS Now senior national security reporter David Rode, former commanding general of U.S. Army Europe and MS Now military analyst, retired Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, former Secretary of Defense and former CIA Director Leon Panetta joins us as well. David, I want to get to you with the reporting. There are questions today about the $25 billion number that the Pentagon gave the House yesterday about how much this war has so far cost. Why are there doubts about that number?
Both Democrats in the House and the Senate think it only covers the munitions that were fired. These are the very costly munitions that were shot at drones and ballistic missiles coming from Iran. They think it's much higher. And one of the issues, this came up also, that we have been told by Democrats on the Hill that there was a lot more damage on American bases than Pete Hegseth made public today, that many more American aircraft were hit and many more facilities. And most tragically, there were 6 members of American forces who were killed in an attack by a drone in Kuwait. One of the survivors there has said there wasn't enough protection for them. So this is just a key flaw, possibly, is that these very, comparatively cheap drones, the Shahed drones from Iran, they cost about $20,000 to $50,000, kept getting through American defenses, killed those 6 Americans, and may have caused huge amounts of damage that we don't know about yet.
General Hertling, one of the claims that was made was on the munitions stockpile here in this country. Pete Hegseth said it was in really good shape. Is that accurate accounting from your understanding?
I don't believe so, Katie. And while he was saying that at one moment, he was also talking later on about the fact that they have to exponentially increase the amount of ammunition that we have in the stockpiles to make up for what has already been considered. Now, of course, he blamed it on the past administration and what was used in Ukraine. Some of that is truthfully hyperbole. But when we're taking a look at what he said across the board, it really went from some unique subjects like the size of the budget. And by the way, it was interesting to me that Secretary Hegseth said at the end of the briefing when he was addressing Senator Kelly that the budget was actually $1.53 trillion. That's different than what's been reported in the past. It's different than the mid-range of 1.5, which is an awful lot. But there were some very interesting dynamics, not only on the size of the budget, but operational design of what's going on in this war, the strategy, the objectives of the operations, the tactics. It ranged all the way from Senator Peters talking about Clausewitz, which, by the way, I wrote an article on in the Bulwark yesterday, and it seemed to be reflected in what Senator Peters were saying, but also Senator Jack Reed at the very beginning, who is probably the most informed member of the SASC. He's a West Point graduate. He spent years in the service, and he knows the military like few others. But there were some very good questions across the board on the operations, the budget, Ukraine issues, performance of the military, war crimes. It was very fascinating and much more subdued than yesterday's testimony before Congress.
Yeah, at times. I mean, he did also continue to say the Democrats were the biggest problem and the biggest threat. I want to get back to the $1.4 trillion budget in just a moment. But first, MS Now political contributor and Punchbowl News co-founder Jake Sherman joins us. Jake, I teased at the top that you would be able to tell us about whether the War Powers Resolution makes an accommodation for a ceasefire. Tomorrow's day 60. The president is supposed to come to Congress tomorrow for a resolution to continue fighting this war. Hegseth said it was paused because of the ceasefire. Is that true?
Well, on a panel with Leon Panetta, who was defense secretary, I think I'm probably the least qualified to answer this question. I think there's I don't think it's entirely clear, to be honest with you. We wrote a story a couple weeks ago in our newsletter that Republicans were increasingly leaning on the 90-day timeline instead of the 60-day timeline. There, Brian Fitzpatrick, Republican from Pennsylvania, has another resolution which explicitly says any clock is paused effectively for ceasefire talks. The fact is this, Katie. The War Powers resolutions kind of all fall along the same lines. They fall along party lines. And the real leverage, if Congress has any leverage here that they're willing to exert, it will only come, in my view, and this might be controversial to say, but I don't really care. This is the reality. Will only come when this administration comes to Congress and says, we need more money to continue to prosecute this war. The White House has told me many times in the last couple of weeks, they're not going to come for this money unless hostilities have ceased. So they seem to understand that dynamic too, which is they don't want any sort of strings attached to their ability to continue to conduct this war. So, Congress for a long, long time, Katie, said this to you before, has been ceding power to the executive branch on matters of war and peace. And it's harmed them in the long run. And this is it's coming to a crescendo now, I would say, more than ever before.
So is the president worried that there might be some Republicans who do not grant him the authority or and if you're talking about strings on the authority, what are those strings and what Republicans should we be watching for?
Well, if the administration comes to Congress to ask for a supplemental, there is certain 100%, I would say, to be an effort to restrict how the president can spend this money. Whether Democrats do it in the Senate, Republicans do it in the House or in the Senate, I don't know the answer to that. But there are enough Republicans who are war weary and will want certain restrictions on how the money is spent, how the war is prosecuted, et cetera, et cetera. I have to imagine that is something the administration wants to avoid. But you could look down the line. I mean, there's a lot of Republicans who have expressed skepticism about this effort. The open-ended nature of this effort. I mean, we saw this with the Iraq war or with Afghanistan or with any conflict that the United States has been engaged on. When the administration asks for money, Congress has power. The Congress is the only entity that could give the administration more money for this effort. So with that money will come strings, almost definitely.
All right. Defense Secretary Panetta, I will ask you the question regarding the War Powers Resolution and whether the president needs to go to Congress tomorrow. Jake said, he deferred to you, so you have the floor.
Well, look, I think it's time for the Congress to step up and be a check on what's happening. I mean, right now we're stuck in this war. And nothing's happening, and there's no clear strategy as to what to do. Each side is blocking the Straits of Hormuz. Each side is paying a price for that. Iran is paying a price. We're paying a price because of dramatically increasing fuel costs. And so it's doing nothing but hurting both countries. So ultimately, there's got to be a strategy here as to how to end the war. And Congress, very frankly, has been AWOL in terms of standing up and saying, wait a minute, we do have under the War Powers Act the authority to basically say we are going to authorize what this administration is going to do in this war. And they should do that. They should do that. And they obviously have the power of the purse in terms of the funding issue. We've seen that happen in the past, and they definitely will address the funding issue and how the war is being authorized. And so there are a lot of checks here, but very frankly, the Congress has to step up. We're at the 60-day or the 60-day limit right now on the War Powers Act. Congress should take action on that in order to indicate that it has a role to play and send a message to the administration that if the administration wants further money, if the administration wants further action, they're going to have to come to the Congress.
I'm sorry, I'm about to sneeze, so forgive me for touching my nose. The MS Now doesn't have this reporting, but Axios has it. And it's particularly significant right now because if there is a resumption of hostilities soon, that would only mean that Congress should have the authority to either approve it or not approve it right now. Axios is reporting that the CENTCOM commander, Admiral Bradley Cooper, is briefing Trump on Iran options right now. These are two sources who spoke with Axios. A short and powerful wave of strikes on Iran to break the negotiating deadlock, taking over part of the Strait of Hormuz to reopen it to commercial shipping that would include ground operations. And the third option, special forces operation to secure Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium. So, Secretary, do you think any of those right now, given the stalemate that we are in, are wise options?
Well, I think that the White House and certainly the military leaders understand that putting any boots on the ground or continuing any military action is not going to be supported by the American people. It's not going to be supported by the Congress. And so the idea that suddenly we're going to go back to war in order to ultimately arrive at some kind of solution here is crazy. So the issue is going to be, what is it going to take? I mean, the president himself has said so often, within a couple days, we'll end this war. Within a couple days, we'll end this war. You can't end the war unless you're negotiating. And right now, each side has decided they're waiting for the other side to blink. It's time for negotiations. It's time for the president to send representatives to Abbottabad to meet with Iran and negotiate on the Straits of Hormuz, negotiate on the issue of nuclear and how to limit the nuclear capabilities, and negotiate on sanctions. That needs to be negotiated. That's the way it works. It's not just going to happen. You can't throw a few more bombs at Iran and expect that that's going to work as well. What you got to do is negotiate and come to an agreement to end the war, period.
All right, let's talk about the budget for next year. $1.4 trillion, maybe $1.53 trillion, as the general just mentioned regarding Hegseth's testimony. David, what do we know about how that money will be spent? There's the golden fleet of warships, but aren't there questions about whether it's a good idea to build really expensive warships in this era of modern warfare? What can you tell me about this request?
So there's concern from various members of Congress, some Republicans and many Democrats, that we're sort of rushing forward with a new generation of weapon systems that we don't necessarily need, that are very costly. One of them is the Trump-class battleship. Essentially, there was Jared Golden, we talked about this yesterday, a representative from Maine, a former Marine, saying we have these amazing Aegis-class destroyers who are the backbone of the military. They're the ones that are enforcing this blockade right now. Why are we creating a whole new line of ships? The cheaper drones I was talking about, there's a $70 billion that would go into new drone technology. Ukraine has come up with amazing counter-drone technology. It's being used by the United Arab Emirates, and it's a lot cheaper than starting systems from scratch, but there appears to be limited interest in that from this administration. So it's a concern just about very high-end spending on these very expensive systems. Patriot missiles, a single one to intercept a drone is $5 million. And it's just the scope of this. Senator Kelly asked about it. This budget is almost more than every military budget of every other country in the world combined. It's astonishing. It's one of the largest year-to-year increase in U.S. defense spending since.
The hearing featuring Pete Hegseth exposed something far deeper than partisan disagreement. It revealed a growing credibility gap at the heart of America's war strategy. What should have been a clear, accountable explanation of objectives instead became a fog of deflection, uncertainty, and rising concern. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes this moment so consequential. At its core, the issue isn't just whether the administration has legal cover under the War Powers Resolution. It's whether anyone, lawmakers, allies, or even the public actually understands the purpose of this war. 60 days in, the absence of a clearly defined endgame is no longer a minor oversight. It's a strategic liability. When senators like Mark Kelly raise concerns about rising costs, unclear goals, and vulnerability in critical regions like the Strait of Hormuz, they are voicing what many Americans are already thinking. Wars without defined objectives don't just drag on, they erode trust. And trust once lost is nearly impossible to rebuild in the middle of conflict. Even more troubling is the financial ambiguity. The administration's claim of a $25 billion price tag feels less like a firm number and more like a placeholder. History has shown that wars rarely stay within initial estimates, and the quiet acknowledgement that real costs could be significantly higher raises serious questions about transparency. If Congress is being asked to approve more funding down the line, it deserves a full accounting now, not later. Then there's the operational concern. Reports of low-cost drones penetrating U.S. defenses and causing fatalities highlight a dangerous mismatch between modern threats and existing strategies. It's not just a battlefield issue, it's a planning failure. If relatively inexpensive technology can inflict such damage, what does that say about preparedness for future conflicts? Voices like Leon Panetta are right to push for congressional action. This isn't about politics, it's about restoring balance. For too long, Congress has ceded its authority in matters of war, and now the consequences are visible. A conflict drifting without direction, oversight, or clear limits. Ultimately, this moment demands more than hearings and headlines. It demands clarity, accountability, and above all, a strategy that goes beyond vague assurances, because without those elements, this war risks becoming not just prolonged but purposeless.